Guys don't really like me very much. Turns out I didn't like them either.
We're fucking gay. Who cares?
I like girls.
Well, boys are obviously stupid. I'm a lesbian until literally proven otherwise.
Sorry, mom and dad. I think eating pussy. I'm gluten-free.
All of you guys are doing too much with your queerness.
Existing as a lesbian is low-key like a fuck you.
Masculine lesbians get more dates.
They do.
None of us really know how to approach each other very well.
I literally explicitly said I wanted to have sex with you.
Yeah.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Queer Collective Podcast. I'm your host, Karbon.
I'm Emily.
I'm Pkat.
And I'm Haviah Mighty.
And welcome to the show. And this episode is sponsored by Vizzy Hard Seltzer, but more on that later.
What does it really mean to be a lesbian, and how has this label evolved over time? In this episode, we dive deep into lesbian identity, unpacking how we navigate femininity and masculinity, the politics of lesbianism, and what it means to truly decenter men. In this episode, historical context and powerful academic quotes will ground our discussion, and you'll hear from 3 lesbians who represent vastly different experiences within the community. Let's get into it.
And with us today, we have Haviah Mighty, who is a trailblazing rapper, songwriter, and producer whose genre-defined sound blends hip-hop, soul, and Afrobeats with a sharp socio-political critique. The first Black woman to win the Polaris Music Prize for 13th Floor, she has since earned a Juno for Best Rap Album, a BET nomination for Best International Flow, and numerous accolades while carving out space for gender nonconformity in hip-hop. Haviah's recent work dives into personal identity and intersectionality, challenging norms in both rap and queer culture as she continues to push boundaries with her music and presence. Haviah, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Our next guest is Pkat, who is a model, actress, and multi-hyphenate. Pkat, she, her pronouns, is a lesbian muse of your dreams. A strong advocate for human rights and queer artistry, she uses her voice to platform marginalized communities and empower those who are othered in our society. She is unapologetically neurodivergent and a plus-size icon. Pkat, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
To give listeners some background, let's go around the table and just briefly share how each of us identify and how we connect to the lesbian label, because the question could mean so many things. So I'm going to go first so everybody has an idea of what I mean by this. So personally, I identify as a queer, androgynous lesbian, and I use queer more so as like my identity and lesbian as like my sexuality.
Yeah, that. I feel like you put words to the complexities of what I think I am. I'm like, how do I? Because I feel like I'm a lesbian, but then I say queer sometimes, and people are like, what does that mean? I also use the queer umbrella. Also because I don't want to decide something that could change at a time or decide like expression that could happen. So yeah, I would say I'm a lesbian, but also under the queer umbrella, whatever that means. And also masculine presenting sometimes.
That makes
I like
sense.
to twerk though.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We love masculine twerk.
Okay, Pkat.
So I'm Pkat, and I do identify as a femme lesbian. I do also identify with the term queer in terms of like, I am part of the queer community. Queer in terms of like counterculture, terms of like outside of the norm, because I think there is such a difference between like LGBTQ plus and being like queer specifically, you know, in terms of like political stances even, or just how you live your life, that in itself is queer to me versus necessarily just being like attracted to women.
Right, yeah.
And again, I have also been playing with the term queer because I have identified as like lesbian down for like years. I wasn't attracted to men, like queer men, cis het men, like any men at all. But you know, now that I've gotten into ballroom, there are some people who are
Talk the things.
You know, especially trans. Like I've always been down for trans people, but there are some trans mascs and trans men. I'm like, oh, so I don't know. You know, we're still playing around with it. You know, I saw this quote I think a few years ago that really helped me identify with the lesbian label, because it was like, I'm a lesbian until literally proven otherwise. And at that point, I will reassess and I will redetermine whether that term lesbian is still fitting for me. So at this point, I still do identify as a femme lesbian. However, like you were mentioning earlier, it can change. Sexuality is fluid. So yeah.
For me, Emily, I am a bisexual, non-binary person, but for the past 7 years, like before this past year, I was identifying as like a high femme lesbian. And I think this past year I've just unpacked how much internalized biphobia there was within me, and also how much like I hated men. And like that was really embedded in that. I just like didn't feel safe with men. There was a lot of like sexual trauma with that too. And I was like, the first time experiencing things with women, I was like, whoa, so much better. I feel so safe that it was like, I must be a lesbian.
Like, this is only...
Yeah. And I was like,
yeah.
I definitely feel more homo-romantic for sure, but I don't know, it's become a lot more fluid in this past year, especially as I question my own gender identity. It starts to call into question your own sexuality as well.
course, yeah.
So the first section that we want to start out with is surrounding lesbian identity and how we experience femininity and masculinity. To start this section out, I would like to reference self-identified radical lesbian Monique Whitting in her work, The Straight Mind, where she argued that lesbians are not women because to be a lesbian is to step outside of the heterosexual norm of women as defined by men for men's end. This is also one of the reasons you'll hear people say that lesbian can be a gender identity as well. I'm wondering how you all feel and relate to this idea of lesbian being a gender identity and like what you think of it.
I get where they're coming from, but I personally don't relate to that because I like calling myself a woman. I like defining as a woman because I also like expanding the definition of what a woman can be, or what a woman can look like, what a woman can act like. So for me, that's why I really stick to that label, is to like push those norms and those boundaries and expand on them. Is like, it's not just one thing. And I still very much like identify with like womanhood.
Yeah, I was having a hard time identifying with the quote, I think for this similar reasons, because I feel very ingrained to the female experience or the woman experience, but also know that how I present and my ideology and expression is societally not conforming to that, and I like the complexity of that because when people connect with me, it's something new, and I feel like one thing that I learned, I only came to terms with my being a lesbian in COVID, like 2020, and so I feel like I was already an adult and in my, and people were changing how they like communicated with me. And it was like, there was just certain things that were inherent to them. Like, oh, if you look like that, then like, what are your pronouns? It's like, well, you didn't ask me that before. And so I kind of recognized there was this like expectation for me to like be all the way somewhere else. And I was
Be
like,
gender non-conforming.
right.
as well.
And I was like, but you're just putting new boxes on things. Like, I'm actually removing all of the boxes. And so I want to exist where I exist and not have to push that into any kind of, but I do really like the woman identity. Like I like taking up that space in the way that I choose.
I really, really appreciate what both of you said because I feel similarly, but because my experience is different as a femme, lesbian, like I know I still kind of play around with my gender, but it's more internally so that I feel a lot more like androgynous or a lot more masc even. Like I feel like my personality, because I look the way I look, people kind of expect my personality to be a lot more like, I don't know, like girly and sweet. I feel like I'm like a bro. Like seriously, I'm a bro just dressed as a girl. But I feel like that lesbian kind of gender identity is so important. I feel like it's almost like a subset of woman, lesbian woman. Because I feel like kind of what the quote had mentioned, like you kind of exist outside of the societal norms of like being subservient to men, which is what the woman identity is.
Yeah.
My
Right.
gosh, I don't
And
know.
existing in the male gaze, basically, yeah.
Exactly. Like I exist outside the male gaze, but I am still very much a woman. Like socialized as a woman, grew up as a woman. Very much still look like a woman. I identify with womanhood. I don't feel like I feel very euphoric in my body. I feel euphoric with the term woman. But I think lesbian, I feel like is a very important like distinctive factor in that.
No, I get that. I think even being non-binary, like I still connect to womanhood in some ways, if that makes sense. In ways that like I'm putting on myself though. Like if someone who's very like cis heteronormative starts like she-herring me and saying like us girls and those kinds of things, I'm like, ugh, I don't feel comfortable with this. But when it comes to like women's rights, women's issues on a political sense, like I still feel very connected to it. I also feel connected to like intuition and those kinds of things, like surrounded around like womanhood. So I don't know, it's complex like for each person, I would say. I think this quote is very much like it represents a lot of like ideology around gender, and sexuality, and like really deconstructing how all of our lives exist within all of these different structures. And I think it is really badass to just say like, despite all of this, like I'm still existing like this within your structure.
Totally.
And I still think that's very cool.
Yeah, and I like what you said about like not being put in another box because of the way that you present, the way that you look, or the way that you act. Because like I know that I give they them like to to the average
That's literally what I'm
person.
talking about.
Yeah. People are always they theming me, and I'm like, it's like it's fine, but like this is how I identify, this is how I choose to look, but it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean that like, now you have to see me differently. Like it's again like what you said, putting me in another box of like, okay, then they must be like more masc in their energy, in their dress, and like whatever else, and they also don't want to be seen as a woman. That it's what it must mean, is that you don't want to be seen as a woman. It's like no. I'm still a woman over here. But like it looks different.
Exactly. And I think that's something that I realized because like the age that I'm at when I came out, just like I'm late 20s.
Yeah.
I'm an adult. I have myself kind of figured out, except for the sexuality part. And, when I started connecting with people, I was like learning from people that were teaching me what it means to be open, but then also locked in their own internal conflict and, communicating these things to me. And I'm like, but you just told me how this is supposed to work. You're putting boxes on yourself that you just told me this space is allowing us to exist in without those things. Yeah, like I'd say the pronoun thing was the biggest thing. I think there was an expectation for me to not be she, her. And I've actually had people not only like ask, but also like ask why I'm not putting it in my bio or why I'm not like having this expectation. And then I was like, like, please stop.
Especially when you're a public persona too. Like people are expecting you to, I don't know, I guess like represent all of these communities the exact way that they want you to. But at the end of the day, that's still like your private persona, Right. And I think it sometimes blurs the line for people. I think for us, this is like our private is our public, if that makes sense, just with what we're doing. But I think as an artist, it doesn't always have to, but people want to demand that sometimes.
Yeah. And also like going through that in the public eye and coming to terms with who you are. Like people expect you to be where you are already or like expect you to know these things. And it's like, but I'm learning who I am and I'm making sense of it all. And there should be room for that. This is like creating that limitation of expression that would be authentic to the individuals that are in that space. So.
100%. I think that is the beauty of queerness is like, here's your answer. It's a non-answer.
Yeah.
You're gonna fuck yourself. And like stay wondering.
And that's what I love about it. I don't need to give you an answer.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if you can all share your relationship with masculinity and femininity and how it's evolved over time for you. And this is like including your expression of it through childhood, adolescence, coming out until now.
As a kid, I was always a tomboy. So like there were early signs in there. It's like I never had like a crush on a guy, but I was like interested in guys in the way of like I want to be that guy. Like I wish that I could look like that guy, or I would try to like do my hair like that guy. But my hair was long, so it didn't work. As you age into like adolescence, and high school comes around and then college comes around, you tune into these like really strong social expectations of like, if you are a girl, you have to be this way. You have to be feminine. Otherwise, guys won't like you. And if guys don't like you, then you don't have any value and you're ugly. And, like your self-worth
like
really goes down. It's social capital. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I was very much one of those people where like, oh, guys don't really like me very much. Turns out I didn't like them either. But like, but at the time I was like,
but I do want to be cool.
I want to be liked.
I must adapt.
I don't want to be a loser. I must wear the dresses and the things. So like, and it felt so wrong. It felt so awkward. I was trying femininity so hard and it didn't fit. And by femininity, I mean like how I dressed.
Yeah.
Because I do feel like part of my energy is like there's a strong feminine energy within me. So I just mean like outwardly presenting hyper femininity was like not it for me, but I was trying so hard to get there and I just couldn't. Then I came out first as bisexual because you always like to like dip your toes in the water.
Drug. Yeah.
It's the gateway gay. Not for everyone. You can stop right there. But for me it was. After that, then I started like feeling myself more into like the lesbian label. And I was like, what do lesbians look like? I went on Tumblr and there was only two options, either very femme or very masc. And I was like, well, I tried the very femme thing, didn't work out. Let me try the very masc thing. And I was like hyper masc. I was like, I was like, and like undercut, shaved. My shirt was too long for me. Like the jeans and like I was really tight jeans. I was trying to look like a cishet dude.
You're very muscular too.
I was super, but well, that was just
That's just genetics, baby.
listen.
No masculine now?
Not as
It was a different level. Like,
Oh, really?
she could pick me up and like swing me around her body.
Oh,
it was like,
what?
she's like 5'4".
I'm edging on 5'5".
Yeah, okay. That's impressive.
It's a hypermask that didn't fit me either, to be fair. Like I was also like performing hypermasculinity to signal to women that you should flirt with me. And I think it was like that same thing that I was trying with hyper femininity, where I was like, please like me, I'm not a loser.
Like validation
Yeah,
almost.
validation. And I was like, the only way to like get that is to like perform either hyper femininity with guys or hyper masculinity with girls.
Yeah, your audience just
My
changed.
audience, yeah.
But the mindset didn't.
And then I found androgyny, and then I like really now I'm feeling yay.
So bland. Okay.
You go, girl.
I'm feeling very comfortable now.
It's really interesting because like so I'm super hyper femme right now. However, like especially in the wintertime or just like days where I just do not feel like putting like the lashes, the nails, the glitter. This stuff is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I wish more people talked about. For a long time there was a lot of androgyny. The reason why I went into modeling, and a huge reason why I still am in modeling, is because like I looked to my icons like Grace Jones. Grace Jones was the person that made me want to go into modeling because I was obsessed with the fact that she could do both. She could do hyper mass, she could do hyper femme. Like her bone structure was like androgynous. It was just giving like cunt. It was giving slay. It was giving like I can do it all, and that's how I identify. So yes, I do dress
She's
hyper femme a lot of
Asian
days.
too, right?
No, that's Grace Jones is black.
Do you know who I'm thinking of? She's
Jenny
like very,
Shimizu.
yeah, very
Jenny
skinny,
Shimizu,
right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Jenny
Yeah.
Shimizu
Yeah.
is also another one of my queer model icons. And that's so funny because I didn't even know I was queer until I was like in my teenage years. But like I
That's
saw
pretty
Grace
early.
Jones.
Congratulations.
No, thank you. Yeah, I came out as bi like quite
Yeah.
young. I just always
Yeah.
knew I loved women.
Yeah.
I remember being like a little girl and reading storybooks, like fairy tales of like
Yeah.
these princesses who would end up with princes. And I'm such a lesbian. I would look at that shit and be like,
You're like,
Something's wrong.
and I was like, but why are women always like the ones who are in positions where they need to be rescued? Why can't another woman rescue them? I don't understand. In real life, also, I was kind of a man hater as well. Like my parents always called me their little feminist, like derogatorily, because I would always in my classes I was one of the smart. I was like a straight A student, right? So I was smarter than the boys, and I'm like, well, boys are obviously stupid. I took the
nah, there's actually studies they perform less well.
Exactly.
Less
Less
well,
well.
bad.
Less well,
That's
bad.
me being nice. Less well kind of bad in school.
So I kind of associated like masculinity with like beneath me almost, right? Which is, which is interesting. It's
I
an
resonate
interesting-
with that.
Sorry. I was really into deities when I was younger. So the goddess kind of archetype was showing women in like their femininity and their power. Yeah. I thought that's kind of how I identified more with. So yes, feminine energy, but like the
And
fact
was
that
it
I could do
always
it all.
feminine, like from childhood, adolescence, coming out till now? Like, did you always dress this like high femme?
No, I didn't. So
Yeah.
like, especially when I was a teenager, or sorry, not a teenager, when I was younger, like a kid, preteen, especially because I grew up fat. Like, I've never been skinny in my life. So especially in the early 2000s, a lot of the clothing that was for like people my size were just kind of oversized sweaters and oversized like pants and whatever. So I wasn't hyper femme. I just always really liked feminine things. I'm such a lesbian, I guess. So like I always liked women. I always valued what they valued, and a lot of what they valued was like very pretty sparkly things and like the nice dresses and like makeup and everything. But in terms of like how even now, like as a model, on set, I rarely am dressed like this femme, how I present. Usually on set, because I've got a shaved head and whatnot, for all the audio listeners out there, I got a shaved head. But they always put me in like mask, like traditionally like lesbian mask fits. That's what the role I filled there. And I found that I really, really identify with and like feel good and like feel comfortable and good in that type of like look as well. So I feel like I was trying to master femininity. And now that I feel like I've gotten a hang of it, now I'm trying to go like definitely more the Grace Jones route where I could do literally anything.
Yeah.
Whatever, I will slay in whatever. Masculine, feminine, just do it all.
So I grew up a tomboy as well, and just like playing sports a lot, and nobody tied it to sexuality, so I didn't. And I think I also grew up in an environment that queerness just was not an option. I don't know, I wasn't really like attractive to anyone. I think that was the thing that was interesting because I looked at crushes that I had on girls as like, oh, I want to like be her, but like I didn't because I was dressing like the boys and they didn't fully accept me because if I played basketball, they would find ways to alienate me. So there was this like very weird thing where I didn't know how to fit in and I also didn't know how to even try to get validation. So I just developed social anxiety and I was a loner.
But you were trying to make sense of yourself in the boxes that you understood, right?
And
in like heteronormative boxes, but you had no other language and you're like, I guess I'm this? Like, it's not making sense. I guess I want to be you.
I think it was like this interesting thing of like the family box that made me feel very validated. But they had no connection to the other parts of me. And so then there was also I guess like the sexuality box where there was no connection whatsoever. And then there was like also the racial box where, you know, my parents made me feel validated in being Black, but the society did not. And so I just kind of felt like I just struggled to connect to people. And so I just didn't really. And I feel like I repressed and suppressed so much, like to the point where I don't even identify with the trauma of not understanding my sexuality when I was younger. When I went to college and, you know, you start to express yourself more, it became apparent that a lot of my younger expressions were, like I used to write a lot of fiction books and a lot of my characters were gay men.
Cool.
And I feel like it was like me, you know, but I would like, it was like okay for it to be that person, but like my expressions, all these social experiments and experiences that you would have with people, I was having in these books, very erudite version, and like not able to talk to people, but like very much like almost researching personality. And so I was very much like in my head growing up. It was only when I went to college that it was like, oh, you have to interact with people. And it opened something up. Also, my music career opened up the need to connect with people, the desire to take experiences and like transform it into like an audible experience. And I think through that, and then also like eventually connecting with someone who was a woman and like the experiences we had, it became very obvious. It's like, okay, you are absolutely suppressing something. Like you have to let that out. So yeah, like in 2020 was when I came to terms with what I think I am now, which is, as I said, like lesbian and queer presenting. It's still so like, I don't know, like I'm very not label centric as well because my origins were so devoid of that, that it's almost hard to place it now. I'm just a person, but I like girls. Guys are cute. But guys are cute too. Trans people are cute. You know what I mean? Like it's just, it's hard to say, but when I started dating, who would come to me is who would come to me. Like I wasn't going to them. So I was like, oh, I guess feminine women. I guess that's what I like, feminine women.
You're just like, I wasn't going to them. They'll come to me.
Sorry, I don't chase, I attract.
Like there's no, so there's intentional and there's unintentional riz. I have a lot of unintentional riz. But intentional, we working on it.
Same with her. Karbon is actually very shy in real life,
so shy.
but people read it as like stoic and confident. You know what I mean? They're like, oh my God, so hot and mysterious. And I'm like, it's a shy little guy.
Social anxiety, actually.
Wow, I feel like we have a lot of similarities. I'm still learning how to initiate. But and through that, I also learned like who was attracted to me. But I was like, I also am still coming to terms with, does that mean that that's only who I'm attracted to? And I think when I first came to terms with, okay, like I'm a lesbian, I like girls, I rap. That looks like this, like a man, you know? And so I feel like I did also go through like the kind of hyper masculinity and doing photo shoots. Like I used to wear crop tops and stuff like that. And then I like completely like got rid of that. And I would like shit on myself when I would interact with people and feminine qualities would come out. I would feel like, oh, that's the old you. What are you doing? Like, you know, like if my tone of voice was higher, or even like I remember like when I started rapping, obviously wasn't in tune with my sexuality. And so I would make my voice higher and I would feel like my tone had to be kind of up here because, you know, Lil Kim's up here, Nicki Minaj. Like who's down here? You know what I'm saying? And there were just a lot of things that were unlearning at the same time, like the tone of my voice and also the fact that like my sauce is actually down here. Like when I make music, some of my demos, like the best vibe is when I'm not pushing it to a tone that doesn't feel natural. So that was a big thing. Also, when I went deeply into the masculinity, then it was like I first tried to repress my feminine qualities that were always there. And then, you know, I think last year was when I really came to terms with the like, there are no rules to any of this. I am allowed to do and like whatever I want. And you know what I mean? And
I think that's queerness, is like removing all the rules.
Yes, that is.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's why when it's like, this is a lesbian episode, but like, what does that mean? Because it's like, it still is a label, and that I feel like, yes, labels are important to kind of understand things, but also we don't want to like align to like we can't exist outside of that.
100%. And we'll also get into the history of it. Like there has been a huge shift towards like removing the rigidness in lesbian identity. So we'll get to that later. But one thing I am curious about, anytime someone comes out a bit later in life, I'm like interested to know more about like how you realized you were a lesbian. You know what I mean? And like what you've unpacked as well. You know?
I would say I had an interest in women for a long time, but I think because the experiences were like not deep, I guess you could say, I was very able to like be like, oh, that was like just a thing. Or like even like all my sexual encounters with women prior to someone that I dated was like a man was there and like maybe we like kissed or something or like I touched her thigh, but it wasn't like real to me. I think, sorry, mom and dad, I think eating pussy was the. I think that was the. I think that was the thing. I think I was
we
like
had to go that far.
yeah, like for me,
something
like,
unlocked.
Well, I'm a very logical person. I was like, well, that therefore, like the math, that really was it for me. But it was beyond that.
It's like Heaven's Gates, just
literally,
it
yes.
was, and all, like the desire to do it also, and the like, and I also had a lot of like sexual shame growing up, even with men. Like I just wasn't in tune with sexuality. Period. Not just with women. So there was also that, like Rastafarian household, like raised vegetarian, like discipline, a lot of discipline. Yeah, like strict parents. So like I wasn't like smoking weed. I wasn't really drinking a lot. Like I was definitely a late bloomer in a lot of ways. So it wasn't just sexuality.
It's a Rastafarian household. No weed?
Maybe not for you.
Hold up.
So no.
I don't know.
My dad had a stint with the law when he was younger, when weed was not legal, and my mom is also disciplined too. So no, there's not a lot of outside stuff going on, and then because of my social anxiety, I wasn't experiencing that very young. But yeah, like more than it was like actually sexual experiences with this person, it was that I loved this person, and I also felt like there was an inability to truly connect with her. And she also wasn't out. I mean, she's also Caribbean. And we had the same thing where it was like, we're this way, but it's like, we don't want our dad to like, but we love our dad. Like, how do we? I think that like, and just being in COVID and the inability to hide anymore. My first experiences with women for sure showed me like, I never really deeply enjoyed my experiences with men. It wasn't that I knew I was feeling a void or a lack when I was in those experiences. And that's also why I would say like queer, like, I don't know, men are so cute. But there's a depth of the, sorry guys. We're in slight competition. But, sorry.
Competition.
There's some things I can't do that y'all could do. I'm pretty short.
Nah, I don't think so.
I'm small. I'm working, you could give me some training. I'm gluten-free.
There's gluten-free, like, protein powder. You're fine.
I'm gluten-free and I'm vegetarian. The combination is tough.
Oh, the vegetarian part is
yeah,
probably
like I'm on a weight gain journey for like 7 years. I'm really trying. So yeah,
protein's hard to get in.
But yes, that's pretty much the how it happened. And I think coming to terms with it though has been really beautiful. A lot of people already knew. And we're like, oh, like I knew that.
Yeah, I know, right? Even it's usually people around you know before you know.
Yeah.
You're like, I think this is what I am. They're like, yeah.
Yeah, friends knew. Family didn't seem to. Like, I think their denial was, like, aligned with mine. But they accepted me and loved me. I remember talking to my ex-manager, like, music manager, and saying to her, I will never come out. I will never come out. I will absolutely 100% be disowned. And like, I remember saying that with definity in my heart. Like, I knew. Yeah. And so, like, 2 years after that, like, being able to break free from wherever I was then is so incredible. Because I knew, like, at that time, like, this expression was not okay for me. Yeah. And now I'm, like, super gay, so.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Pkat, was your coming out experience positive, like, with your parents?
Ooh.
Just evil
maniacal laugh.
Damn. Okay.
Is that good, eh?
Well, you know what? Okay, so like I said earlier, I've always kind of known I liked women, right? Except I read this stupid fucking self-help book. It was like having girl crushes is normal during puberty. And I was like, amazing. All these romantic feelings that I'm feeling for women. Normal. I'm straight. You know, like I just have a girl crush and I'm going through puberty. I was like 5 when I read this book. So
wow, so young.
Oh yeah,
high
I've
literacy rate. Congratulations.
Oh, yeah, I was like top
I was
of
reading
my class.
like Run Spot Run. I'm
No, I was
impressed.
reading like
You were
like
deconstructing
novels.
your
Giving
sexuality.
Yes.
Wow,
I've always
shit.
been like, I don't know, an academic. I always really liked like learning, just having knowledge. I think knowledge is power.
Yeah.
And I'm obsessed with power. So
Hey.
I'm obsessed with knowledge.
That's
I was like, okay, cool. I'm just going to be myself. And again, honestly, at the time, I had bigger fish to fry. I was hella
Yeah.
bullied for like my looks, for everything.
Yeah.
Like I was only good at school. So I was good at like gathering information, but I didn't have friends, much less people who had a crush on me. Like I was like, you know, in like movies where you see the most bullied kid, you know, gets picked last for gym, gets shit thrown at them. Like that was literally my experience. You know, I would always get picked last for years. Always get picked last for gym. And of course, I'm neurodivergent as fuck. So I'd be having like what I didn't understand were like autistic or ADHD meltdowns. And of course, when you're like in grade 5, you can't explain that and you don't know the words. And like my parents are not supportive in life. But like, especially not about in terms of like mental health stuff. So they couldn't put it into words either. I was just seen as like a freak out or like a spaz.
Yeah.
Spaz was the biggest word they called me, or like a fucking loser, you know? So I had bigger fish to fry. Being gay also probably didn't help because I would say like really gay things about women. And then people would be like, oh, she's also gay and weird. Like, not only is she fucking spaz and weird, but she's gay. And that's like weird in the early 2000s, right? So I think I just continue to say like gay bullshit like all the time. Would be like, so you know how guys like never make an impression in your brain, but women, you can remember every single line of like hair that they have and like they sparkle in the sun and, you know, and people were like, yeah, you gay as fuck. Yeah.
I resonate with that so deeply. Like, I feel so bad, but I get introduced to like people's boyfriends, and I have to get reintroduced like 5 times.
Same.
I'm like,
I don't remember you, girl.
why
what's your
are you
name?
Yeah.
dating such
Especially
an
if you're
unforgettable
white.
man?
It's like, oh, this guy, brown hair, white. I'm like, that's everyone. That's
His
all
name
the
is Matt.
dudes. Yeah, like
His name is
everyone's
Wears
name is
glasses.
Matt.
He
Like,
likes The Office and dogs. Like,
Fuck, we're gonna talk about
Sorry
crypto.
for all the queer guys named Matt.
no hate to Matts, you know. Anyway, so like when I came out as bisexual, actually it was like one of my friends who had told me like she had come out, and then my immediate thought was, oh, amazing, now we can start dating. And then I was like, that is
Lock it down.
not very straight of me to think. And so after like reading more literature, I was like, no, I'm definitely into women. So I like you guys had mentioned,
And
I
you're still
used
5 at
bisexual.
this point. I'm just
No. I was 16. I was 16, 15 or 16 on this happened. So could you imagine? No, lol. I was like 15 or 16.
Yeah.
And then I was like, okay, when I come out as bi, because I've always loved women, I thought this was like a normal girl crush thing, but it's not. It's like I want to marry them, and I, you know, men just never capture my attention. But again, I said bisexual because I was still familiarizing myself. And I came out, I didn't come out to my parents for a little bit because I was raised Catholic, very Catholic. So, and I was like in a lot of peer retreat. I was like a Bible leader or something like that, you know? I feel like the pipeline from like peer retreat leader or like Catholic leader to like lesbianism is like a straight line a lot of the time.
It's linear.
it's linear.
I'll investigate that.
Well,
Thanks.
it's a lot of us are like looking for community, you know? We're looking for like
Let us
just
pray.
belong somewhere. No, literally. And you're like, I'm not into men, you know, I'm not into dating because you're a fucking lesbian.
Right,
But,
it's a good excuse.
Exactly. You're like, I'm so pious. You're like, no, you're just gay. I don't know. I think I saw a Samantha Jones compilation when I was young, and I was like, oh, that's so me. I'm gonna be a man eater. So I ended up being like a man eater when I was like dating men because I was just like because I would not give I was very forthcoming about sex, but I also put my own pleasure first. I literally did not give a fuck about what anybody had to say ever because I'm like, I'm literally better than you. I'm literally smarter than you. I don't think I'm better than men now, but like at the time I was like, I'm literally better than you and smarter than you and sexier than you. Like, you have nothing to offer me other than your dick, like, and your money. Like, I don't give a fuck about you. So that's how I was when I was dating men. And
I feel like that's the only way to have a good sexual experience with them.
right?
Unless you're straight.
And I would never fake an orgasm.
Comment
so.
from a lesbian.
like,
you just have to not see them as a person, and that works the best. Yeah.
Unless you're straight and you like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no.
Those foreign things.
We don't kink shame, like,
I don't kink.
no kink shaming.
Yeah, it seems like a fetish, but whatever.
Anyway, so I would always be putting them first, but then I wouldn't even remember their faces. I would like go through men like so quickly because I was just like, there's something wrong with me. Why am I not feeling some sort of attraction? Why does this feel kind of mid? Like, why am I like not sticking with this? None of this feels like exciting or fresh. It just feels like, a dick with a face and move on. And then I watched Glee and I saw myself in Santana a lot. Yeah. Shout out to all you Gleeks out there. I know y'all are listening to this.
It's the gang signs that are sending me.
It's actually a strong crossover between Queer Collective listeners and Gleeks. If you're a Gleek listening to this right now, drop a music sign in the comment section.
Hey.
Shout out to my Gleeks.
Identify yourself.
So at this point, all my friends were like, hey, Pkat, you're not bi. You're just a lesbian. I was like, no. And then I kept on doing it over and over again. And then I got to a point where I was like, no, I really am a lesbian. Wow. Yeah. And then when I came out, 0 people were surprised. Like, none of my friends, even my parents who were hyper-religious, they're like, yeah, obviously you're a lesbian. Literally, like, 0 people were surprised.
Was your mom accepting?
My stepdad's actually more open-minded, I think, which is interesting because, like, cause he grew up in Jamaica, and Jamaica is very, like, it's quite homophobic. But he was actually a lot more tolerant and open about it, and he could tell that I was, like, being serious. My mom asked me, she's like, are you sure? My stepdad's like, yeah, she's sure. He said, that explains a lot from your childhood. And I was like, well, y'all should have told me because I was out here struggling for decades.
No one wanted to guide me?
Literally, I was like, what the fuck? Yeah. So my mom kind of took it, they were both very like, that's cute and all, but like, don't tell the family, don't tell people. We can't have, our straight A student daughter being a fucking dyke, until they both work for TD. TD started hosting the Pride parades, and they're such capital whores. So they're like, as soon as TD starts running the Pride parade, they're putting rainbow stickers on their laptops, being "I love my lesbian daughter," waving around the pride flag, like
my God.
going on the float and being like, "Oh, are you gonna be at the Pride parade too?" And I was like, yes, you dumb hoes. I've been going to the Pride Parade for years. What the fuck are you asking me? So, So, I mean,
do you think it's like authentic
now.
though? Like probably there was some like info sessions they had to take. Do you think like it actually resonated with them, or they're like, I want a promotion because of my lesbian daughter?
I think it's a bit of both. I'm sure, I'm sure they did, they're like, they're realizing that like being gay is not so bad after all.
Yeah.
But only once you stick capitalism on it.
Exactly. Only once there's some sort of paycheck involved, or only once there's some sort of like, my parents are really into appearances.
So if it's okay to others, now it is okay for us.
Exactly.
It's a signal that it's like gone mainstream.
Exactly.
It's like when it is financially beneficial for companies to do it, that is a signal that like the majority of the population aligns with us.
Thanks, Vizzy. This podcast is proudly sponsored by Vizzy Hard Seltzer.
Over the last 5 years, Vizzy has supported our mission to authentically and positively represent the entire LGBTQ2S+ community.
And with Vizzy's vibrant flavors, you can follow your own vibe. Be bold, be flavorful, and above all else, be yourself. Plus, Vizzy only has 100 calories and 1 gram of sugar per can.
Cheers! Must be of legal drinking age, and please enjoy responsibly.
And now, back to the episode.
I definitely really resonate with everything you're saying about like the way I was interacting with men before, and this is one of the reasons I saw myself as a lesbian, is like I wasn't really seeing them as people. Like I was going like full womanizer. Is it womanizer?
Man-eater.
Man-eater. Nice way. Yeah, I was doing that, and then I realized dating queer men, I was like, I can see you as a whole person. And it's because they've also done the equal work of like deconstructing all of these societal structures, and we can both have this relationship that now exists outside of it. When it comes to sub-identities like Butch, Femme, Stud, Dyke, etc., the lesbian community, of course, has a very rich history that I would love to share with you. Before I begin, I'd like to credit the YouTuber Obviously Queer, as her video essay, Femme, was super informative in my research. But let's start with the basics. Butch, Stud, and Femme. They're terms for sub-lesbian identities that started being used around the 1930s, predominantly in lesbian working class bars in the US and Canada. So butches are queer women who embrace stereotypical masculine traits. Butch is female masculinity. Stud is a term solely used for the Black community to define a Black masculine identifying lesbian. It appears as though this term didn't come into documented use until the 1960s during the second wave of feminism, when Black women were left out of white feminist movements and subsequently created their own. One thing I do want to mention is that Butch does include BIPOC lesbians as well, but but studs is like specifically just for the Black community. Other than that, femmes, a queer woman who embraced stereotypically feminine traits. Femme as an identity was especially bounded to the counterpart butch or stud, since femmes passed as straight unless in the company with a butch partner, and this was like 30s to 50s. So kikis are lesbians who weren't strictly butch or femme in the 40s and 50s, and it was a highly derogatory term because from the 30s to 50s, butch and femme were seen as requirements in the lesbian community. Instead, kikis were seen as shifting between the two and as disrupting the butch-femme order. And some voices at this time stated that kikis disgusted them and must have split personalities. The eye contact at Karbon. Also a Gemini. I'm just kidding.
Never made a choice in your life.
Yeah. Lovin'. I feel attacked.
So to understand the historical significance between the labels, you must understand the butch-femme dynamic as a duo. So it's like one word, butch-femme. Lesbian author Joan Nessel believes that despite a femme's ability to pass, they play a huge role in butch-femme visibility. While butches are always clocked as homosexuals, it is as a couple that they created lesbian visibility in the US. And the dynamic had this key aspect of emotional and physical protection. So the butch femme community during this time was a support system against an unaccepting society. Femmes often provided emotional support for the butch, and the butch took on the role of protector from physical violence and street harassment. So it was kind of a dynamic out of necessity as well as identity. The next aspect of it is it was also a sexual dynamic, of course. So this is a quote from Boots of Leather, Slippers of Gold, which is an iconic lesbian text filled with interviews from butch femmes at the time. So the butch was expected to be the doer and the giver, and the femme's receptive passion was the butch's fulfillment. But this is where it gets a little bit confusing because some people wouldn't consider butch and femme as just your presentation. It could also be your role in bed. So butch equals top. However, several voices from this time define butch femme not by gendered aesthetics, but by these erotic roles. This is another quote from someone named Reggie from Boots of Leather, Slippers of Gold. You can't tell butch femme by people's dress. I knew women with long hair, femme clothes, and found out they were butches. Actually, I even know one who wore men's clothes, haircuts, and ties who was a femme. Now, of course, there's also an element of insecure masculinity. So in the same book, many femmes expressed an interest in touching their partner more, but that many butches were scared that rolling over or quote-unquote being flipped, as it was called at the time, would make them less butch. From your story, Haviah, was something that you were resonating with of like this need to not show femininity, to like protect your masculinity. And some people were more switch. So this is another quote, A Restricted Country by Joan Nessel. And she says, when one moved behind this opening gambits, a whole range of sexuality was possible. We joked about being butchy femme or femme butch or feeling kiki going both ways. We joked about a reversal of expectations. Get a butch home and she turns over on her back. But moving into the 60s and 70s, the rigidness of the sexual dynamic started to go away and folks started to feel comfortable exploring outside of these predetermined roles, which became accepted in the butch femme community. That's all I'm going to share for more, but there's a lot more that we're going to get into throughout this conversation. I'll like add it in different doses, but I'm wondering if anything came up for either of you and how you feel, if you do feel a certain connection to like the history of femme identity for you, Pkat, or like potentially with stud or butch for you.
Yeah, that stood out to me. And I guess I always thought that like stud was like a term that I didn't fully identify with because I felt that it meant that I needed to be more masculine. And I thought that once I came to terms with, I'm allowed to have feminine qualities, and I do, and it's okay, then that makes me not stud. It's like a stem, or like I like trying to put myself in this like box. But I guess the definition that you gave was that it's just Black female masculinity, or women that are masculine and also Black, they can be butch, but then there's this like subsect where there was a non-inclusiveness. That's the understanding
It definitely in like the 30s to 50s, it was very rigid. The thing is, what I've seen watching different videos about studs is like, I feel like it is actually a pretty rigid community still. I think potentially like there is very strict gender roles in the Black community, you know? And I think potentially that also plays into it. I've seen a lot of videos where people are talking about like the toxic masculinity that can be associated with it.
Interesting, because that's something I
no,
was
you don't
aware
feel
of
that.
right away. I was like, oh.
Yeah. And I don't think it is for everyone. Like, I think you can be a stud and you can redefine that and you can have non-toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
I think it's just probably something that happens to be like a reoccurring problem for some people. But I think the way that you're describing yourself as like you do like to express femininity as well, and like you like to be more fluid, like I feel like that is more androgyny, you know. And I also think that masc is a new word that's kind of replacing butch, you know, in the same way that like it's less political, I would say. Like I think stud and butch are very political words. Some of us don't realize how political they are. Like we don't realize the context of this that like we're sharing throughout this episode is like there is like a deep political history to all of these terms. And a lot of people, they feel connected to them because of the political history. They're like, I want to continue identifying as like a strong butch woman because I like want to honor all of the butches that came before me that made it possible for me to be who I am, you know?
Right.
But I also think that it doesn't give you a lot of room and flexibility, and we'll talk about that later as well. Like I think the community overall is moving towards queerness because of we're just getting more language, you know what I mean? I think we used to think it was a gender identity as well because we didn't have very much language around gender. We didn't understand transness as well. We didn't understand non-binary. We didn't have any of this language to describe ourselves. And now that we have this language and other people who we want to date have this language, you're like, so your gender, you not being a woman also calls my identity into question now, and it all gets a little bit more confusing, you know? And then I think that's where people are like, you know, I'm just queer.
I think that's what happened for me for sure because like I knew there was history I didn't know. Like masc is a phrase that I think I've like allowed myself to feel connected to. And for some reason, I guess the difference between that and like stud is like, I feel like masculine allows femininity, whereas I guess I felt like stud didn't. And that might be my own perception. I just always felt like I'm not quite a STEM either, but like I felt like, oh, if I say I'm a stud, then that means that I don't have the ability to open up in certain ways. But it's nice to hear about kind of like the changing terms. And I think because stud came at a time when there was a need for representation for Black women who were not feminine presenting, I think that creates that maybe that rigidness that's there, and we're just in a different time now.
And I think a lot of the time you're learning masculinity from the examples that you have, right? And typically that's from men. And I think it takes a lot of unpacking, like depending on the men that you have around you and what your role models of masculinity are. It takes a lot of unpacking for you to also learn what non-toxic masculinity can look like, just the same way that it's hard for men to do that too, is like if you're not shown what it looks like, then where are you going to figure that out?
Absolutely.
You know?
And I think that that's actually a part of a reason why I didn't identify with the stud right away is that my dad is like kind of an anomaly. His temperament is very, like he is a very masculine person, like, but he's so emotional and he's very in tune with his emotions and he's like vocal about it. And I grew up in that environment. And so I feel like most guys I met are not like my dad. And that kind of made me feel like I don't know how to be toxically masculine. I actually don't. Like I'd have to become it. It's not innate, and I don't have examples in the house of it. I also felt like I don't know what that means then, like where I exist. Like I don't know if I'm doing it right or.
I mean, I think just like the way you dress, your personality, like you did give like stud energy, I will say. I feel like you give that.
People say that
if
to
you
me.
want to give that.
Yeah,
you know,
people
it's
say
a
that.
choice if you want to identify that way. Like that is.
Like I could change every night.
Yeah. I don't know if it feels good to you. Like it almost feels like a gender identity in some ways. Like within lesbianism, like I feel like Butch, Femme, like they describe the way that you express your masculinity and your femininity, you know, more so than what you're attracted to. Like that's more lesbian.
Yeah, I almost feel like I do identify with it. And then the thing that I don't identify with it is the toxic masculinity that is within it. Like I think I do identify with that term of stud, or like I feel like when people encounter me, they think that that's how I would rationalize myself or whatever. And I think the only reason that I don't is because when I came into the space, I felt like a lot of people who were studs, there was like just this extra thing, and I was like, I don't know that
like, I don't
part.
wanna feel that.
And I didn't grow up in it, so it was also foreign.
So I thought it was really interesting, like how you said, like they could be like, you even gave examples how there people would wear dresses and long hair and like be the butch because they were the top in bed, right? Or like people would dress like present masculine, you know, and have short hair and wear men's clothes and be the femme because they were the bottom. From my own research, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure the comments will, but like the femmes actually used to be more of the breadwinners because the femmes could fit in more in heteronormative society and be able to work like, you know, their jobs and be feminine versus like the Butches, there was a lot of kind of societal pushback for them, so they couldn't be as visible. They couldn't, be, I guess, working in the same way that femmes did. So I think that's really interesting dynamics. I think it's also cool that, like, it is almost the opposite of what heteronormative dynamics are, where the woman is, like, the stay-at-home and, like, the man is the breadwinner. Because even today, there can be some sort of stereotype where, like, the masc or the butch is going to be the top and, like, the femme or, like, the whatever is going to be the bottom. Throughout history, it's always been historically, like, subversive. And I think it's really beautiful that it's still today quite subversive. Like, I'm femme, I identify as a switch, but, like, personally, in my personal experience, a lot of the mascs that I've had sex with are bottoms. So, like...
Okay, so this is a thing that I heard. A lot of my friends were telling me that. They're like...
These nails come off. These are press-ons, Like, yeah, a lot of mascs I fucked have been bottoms. So,
Yeah.
it's really cool.
Like, we're soft little guys.
Haviah, top, bottom, or both?
Karbon wants to know.
Yeah, for me, I'd say like 80% top. 20% bottom.
Oh,
Yeah.
cool. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it can be boring in a long-term relationship to just do one thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I do want to switch
No
it up.
hate to stone tops and pillow princesses.
Heavily biased.
Yeah. Am I? Yeah. I don't know.
Well, I think the bias comes from like whatever you like.
That's true. Bisexual and non-binary. I like to do everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want it all.
Yeah.
What about you?
I think I'm both top and bottom, but I'm dominant in both.
Oh, so you're
I'm a dom, but I can be top and bottom, but
Yes.
from like a dom energy.
still 20%, but yeah, when it's submissive, it's like I'm still taking it.
Yeah.
Honestly, I would say like a good 50-50. Like a nice solid 50-50.
Super, like,
switch.
Yeah.
Super switch. Like when I took the BDSM test, like switch was top, like number 100% switch.
Yeah.
Like 100%.
100%.
Switch. Like I said, I love power. So I like being good at fucking everything. I got to be good at topping. I like to be good at bottoming. I like being good at like dom, sub, like
All of
whatever.
it.
Like I want to do it all.
I
So
love
Yeah.
very 50-50.
And I want to do it all well. Do we think there's a divide in terms of the white versus BIPOC lesbian community? I think like we saw that with the term stud coming out as like specifically because of the divide that existed. Do we think this still exists, and why do we think it persists?
I don't know if it fully answers the question, but something that I feel like I've come to terms with recently is that when I'm in queer spaces, my intersectionality starts to scream at me. I'm a rapper. I make hip hop music, and I am in a male dominated space, which is also predominantly Black. And there's a lot of things that exist in that space that I think are just the antithesis of the queer space. And I feel like because of that, I am a energetic representation of that space, even if it's not like communicated with words. And so I think sometimes I have more hurdles that are invisible in terms of feeling like people in the space can connect with me, because societally there's just an association with the space I take up that might not feel safe. That's something that I came to terms with like literally last weekend. I think it's just the awareness that masculinity that is Black can feel unsafe in queer spaces because of this association with Black men. It's not just because I'm Black, but I'm also dark skinned. I have locks, and I rap. Like it's not. I look Black. I do Black things. You know what I mean? Just like it's a world. I also recognize that I can exist in certain spaces that are actually unsafe for people that represent like me.
Yeah.
I actually try to do a lot of like identifying that I just kind of fell here and I don't have a choice because I'm just here. I feel like it's like a part of my duty as well to create more safety there, because I know a lot of Caribbean people, Jamaican, Bajan, Grenadian, that are queer. And it gives me a place to hopefully try to shift that divide. Like I put out a song, it was a coming out song. I guess it was the first time that I actually talked about being with a woman. And it was like a bashment jam, like, it was
Nice.
like, it was like sweaty, very, very Black. And I was very intentional about having it be very queer and straight.
Yeah.
And it was obviously safe because I was curating space.
What do you mean
like,
by straight? Like,
I just mean like inviting straight people. That is the space that I take up.
Yeah.
And I do have an inherent benefit of not being a man, I think, where I think it is very difficult for Black men.
Black queer men. For
Black
sure.
queer men. Like I think it's like,
Yeah.
hopefully I'm not going too off topic, but like there was a friend of mine, and when I was coming into my queerness and queer identity, he's a Black man who's gay. And something that I noticed, a lot of Black men date white men, almost specifically. I almost never see gay Black men dating each other. But then in the space that I was in, I felt as a straight woman, I wasn't really being
coming out.
that I wasn't really being pursued, and especially by Black men. But then when I came out, like all the black girlies were pursuing me. And I was like, this is weird. And so I was just kind of like, oh, there's something that's different that's happening. And so I asked him, why do you think that is? Like, am I like off base or is it like, and he was like, yeah, like black men are down low. So it's much easier. If I actually want a real dynamic where I can like be introduced to the parents and stuff, I'm going to find me a mat. I think when you have black masculinity, there is like this kind of expectation of what that means.
Yeah.
I think it even predates all the way back to slavery, where it's like there was very specific things that they wanted you to see from a black masculine man and very specific ways to control that.
Yeah.
And there's still so much unlearning even just in the hetero space there. So I just think it's maybe generational trauma that is just adding to the complexity of what queerness even is.
And I definitely want to clarify, like, it comes from a place of self-preservation as well. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, being so heavily marginalized that you don't want to be further marginalized or
Yeah.
further scrutinized, you know?
Yes.
So it's not, I'm not saying that black men are bad.
No,
You know, by no means, I'm not
That's
saying
why
that.
it's so important to
Yeah.
me to create the
Yeah.
identify that
Yeah.
safety is important,
Yeah.
but to bridge the gap because I feel that I can because of the spaces I'm in.
Yeah.
with you.
I think it's powerful to, like, bridge divides between people, like, especially when our society is so divided right now.
I do have a lot of thoughts about this. Like, just because I'm a person who goes to a ton of different queer events, right? Different types of queer events too. I go to a lot of, like, you know, parties hosted by BIPOC people, parties hosted by queer people. Oh, sorry, white people. It's frustrating for me because, like, okay, so we live in Toronto. I mean, shout out Toronto. But, like...
Put up the gang signs.
no. But we live in Toronto, and Toronto is hailed as one of the most multicultural cities in the world, right? And it's funny because, like, I found that when I was dating men, my race was never really so much. It was fetishized, sure, but it was never seen as like a deterrent between white men or like any BIPOC men dating me. But for some reason, it is a lot more of I've seen it a lot more within lesbian dating. Like,
Interesting.
Really?
yeah, personally, which I thought it was really interesting because, like, I hook up with people of all, like, races and everything. But, like, in terms of dating, I've wanted to only date BIPOC people because of, like, a shared camaraderie, shared experience. And, like, because the BIPOC lesbian experience, I think, is so different from a white lesbian experience. White lesbians are hailed as, like, they're the most popular ones. Like, if anybody thinks of, like, a popular celebrity,
like
lesbian
the white
celebrity.
YouTuber
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
lesbians. Like,
You think
yeah.
of
Not
white
even YouTuber, like celebrity.
like
Right.
Chapel, when people started saying Chapel Rowan was the first lesbian to start making lesbian sex songs, I was like, hold your fucking horses. Like, there have been so many, like, Sid was the first example that I thought of, like, for
Oh,
me,
yeah,
explicitly sexual, like, lesbian songs. So,
Yep.
and I've been listening to Sid for years, like the internet. I've been listening to Victoria Monet for years, and she's bisexual, but she's made tons of songs about fucking women, like Kalani, lesbian Jesus icon Hayley Kiyoko, you know, like,
True.
like, these people have been making, these BIPOC queers have been making, like, sexy sapphic songs for years, and, like, now that, you know, there's a white person doing it, now it's, like, acceptable. Now lesbians finally have some lesbian sex songs, when you did have that for decades before, but you just didn't tune in.
Yeah.
I find even in dating spaces too, like, whiteness is valued even with, like, some BIPOC queer folk, because that's what's kind of projected as, like, the lesbian standard. The lesbian standard is whiteness almost.
Yeah.
Which is I like was very surprised to see that.
It's also the standard for women and femininity as well.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? I think for women, people of color, you're always trying to fit in that box of femininity because it's traditionally white characteristics of what society tells you this is what feminine is. So it's like you can never quite fit that. You know what I mean? Like, you're always trying to be different, you know, but there's a lot more permission for white women to be able to, like, explore and experiment with their identity and still feel feminine.
And like, even the fact that, like, there is unfortunately that, like, toxic masculine ideal of, like, a stud being only, like, super hyper masculine. I mean, I'm sure it's existed within white queers before, but, like, it's not the same now. You know, I think there's a bit more room, like you said, for, like, white people to kind of experience and, like, play around with their gender a little bit, or their presentation even. But even, like, in dating, in terms of, like, friendships, like, I'm noticing a lot of my, like, white queer or, like, white lesbian friends, they're friends with only other white lesbians. And I'm like, that's fucking difficult in Toronto. Like, how did you even do that, you know? And, like, because I've been getting into the ballroom scene as of last year, I'm like, where are the sexy BIPOC queers in the city? Please, God, somebody show me. And I went to a ball and I'm like,
there you are.
that's where they are.
They're
There we
there.
go. But, like, even those spaces, right, there's very few white people, and I find like a lot of BIPOC queer people tend to stick together. A lot of white queer people stick together.
It's true. Yeah.
There is very much that divide, even in a city, like, super multicultural like Toronto. I find that even maybe in straight cultures, weirdly like less of a stark divide, you know?
Yeah.
Just in my personal experience. But like, hey, like obviously everybody's experience is different. Yeah, I was really frustrated by that, and how a lot of like white lesbians, they won't like say that like BIPOC lesbians aren't allowed, but like they'll do a lot of the parties that are held are like kind of referencing a lot of like whiteness, and they don't reference. It's not necessarily a safer space or like a space where a lot of BIPOC queer people feel included, because the music is like different. Than
I was going to say music plays
exactly.
a huge role in that.
Aesthetics, like the references that people are using, you know, people
Can
think
feel very othering.
Exactly.
Yeah.
People are saying like, oh, it was gay. The summer was gay as fuck because we had Chapel Rowan and
Charlie XCX.
Charlie XCX and fucking Billie Eilish. And I'm like, okay, so 3 white people, that's what makes gay culture? Like, I don't think so, you know?
Yeah.
It was really frustrating.
It's a good take.
Yeah, difficult for me,
very
honestly, to get into like a lot of lesbian media, because I was like, I don't identify with this at all.
I think a couple of things. I think possibly, these are just theories. I don't know for sure. But I think that BIPOC people can seem intimidating to white people. Like if you grow up, especially around white culture, white people, like to try to date somebody who's black or brown or Asian, etc. Like I think that for the average white person, that might feel intimidating. And also culturally, there are differences. So to try to like adjust or step into somebody else's culture is like, that feels uncomfortable. I don't want to do that. Whereas for like BIPOC people, we have no choice a lot of the time. We have to adjust to white culture. We have to, like for me, growing up, all I wanted was to be white, because that would mean getting accepted by other people. That would mean like being amongst my peers and not feeling othered or awkward or whatever. So I highly adjusted myself throughout the years to the point where now I feel the most comfortable around white people. And lately, and by lately I mean like over the past like year-ish, I've been like, hold up.
Hold up. Wait a minute.
Wait a minute now. Why don't I feel the most comfortable around other brown people, Latin people, or black people, or Asian people? Like what?
Like, why is it not more innate?
Yeah, why is it not more innate? Why is it not more like organic that I feel more comfortable? And it's like because I highly adjusted myself to fit whiteness. And now I gotta change that a little bit. You know, I gotta go back to the roots a little bit more, because there are so many times where I like experience white events or just like white culture, white friends, white people. And I'm like, I don't relate to what the fuck y'all are saying right now. Like, why do we need to play Chapel Roan on loop? Like, we don't need to do that. And why is there like no other type of music that's playing right now? Like, not even if it's not just Chapel Roan, there's not another type of music that's playing. And I'm like, this is like starting to feel like not innate anymore. It's starting to like feel not organic anymore. And I'm like kind of waking up to like my own race. I'm like, hold up, I'm brown? Shit.
Yeah.
That's a hot take. When you started off, you said that people are often intimidated. And that's like a word that I get a lot. Like outside of sexuality, just people are just intimidated by me. And they'll tell me when they meet me or get to know me, oh, like I was really intimidated by you when I first saw you, or like I knew of you, like, and this has been people that are just platonic friends. This has been people that I've eventually connected with, and yeah, I just feel like that hit me in the chest when you said it, because it's like super real.
I think we were taught to be intimidated by people who aren't white. Watching like anything in the media was like people who aren't white are intimidating, and you, even though you aren't white, should also be intimidated.
As a white person.
Ally.
It also comes from like a fear of like getting things wrong, or like, you know what I mean? Or hurting someone's feeling when you have like good intentions. I think I grew up in a high school where there was probably like a total of like 5 people of color. And people on the other side also have the experience of like, I grew up in a school with like 5 white people, you know what I mean? And you just like don't really know how to mix the culture innately. It's the same thing you're saying is like, when you started outlining all of these different like pop cultural differences, it's like, yeah, these spaces feel so different in almost all of your senses, you know? And like that can be a bit jarring to like make that transition. But obviously like we have lots of like POC friends now, and that takes a lot of like intentional learning. And I think like you can tell by people's body language when they're uncomfortable in a space, you know? And they just don't know how to act. Like they're worried, overthinking themselves in this new space. And I think it's what you said is like a lot of people of color have to adapt to whiteness in order to like get jobs, be in like these professional environments, is like you have to perform whiteness. So it's like you're already used to doing that performance, but a lot of white people, unless you are choosing to do that because you want to go and meet people outside of your own experience, you're not doing that.
I have a heavy flow, and it's actually super annoying when I go to bed with a tampon in or a Diva cup and I wake up to a bloody mess because it's leaked everywhere. Now, period underwear like Aisle has actually been such a huge game changer for me because now I can get a restful sleep and wake up without any mess.
Today's episode is brought to you by Aisle, the original period underwear company. Proudly queer-owned, Aisle has been leading the way in sustainable period care since 1993, redefining what period products can do for you and the planet for nearly 3 decades.
Let's talk about their Boost Boxer. Now, this is a period underwear like you've never experienced before. The Boost Boxer is a reliable, comfortable, and inclusive style option for everybody. Yes, everybody. Whether you're on the go, working from home, or looking for overnight protection that you can count on, this boxer brief is designed to move with you.
So what makes it so special, you might ask? First, it's made with sustainable fabrics that are breathable and leak-proof, so you stay comfortable and dry all day long. It's made for the heaviest of flows. The leak-proof gusset is sewn from the front of the waistband all the way to the back, while the removable boost liner lets you customize your absorbency level, giving you extra protection when you need it most. And unlike some other reusable period products, the Boost Boxer is PFAS-free and designed to keep you feeling fresh with no leaks.
And as if the underwear wasn't good enough, another reason why we love Aisle so much is because they are a certified B Corp. That means that they're held to some of the highest standards for social and environmental responsibility. It's period care that you can feel good about, literally and figuratively.
So why settle for less when you can have it all? Inclusive styles, comfort, sustainability, and performance. Head to periodaisle.com and use code QueerCollective for 15% off. Aisle, sustainable period products for every body.
Thank you, Aisle, for sponsoring this episode. Okay, so the next piece that we want to get into is the queering of lesbianism and the political nature of lesbianism. So my question for you both is, do you feel like lesbian is inherently a queer identity?
Existing as a lesbian is low-key like a fuck you to like a lot of heteronormative patriarchal standards, because like you're a woman who is existing outside of the male gaze. You are like choosing to be happy outside of patriarchal and male gazy standards. So that in itself is quite inherently political and quite inherently queer. I know a few people personally who like identify as politically lesbian, even if they do have some sort of attraction to men, because like their lives are lived like outside of that male gaze kind of vibe.
That's how I feel.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
So I do think it's inherently queer.
Yeah, I think anything that's not straight is inherently queer. Like anything that's not aligned with this specific thing that we all learned, this tradition, then unless I'm missing something. But I think
trick question. I'm just kidding.
I think for me, I think lesbianism, as I identify with it now, is inherently queer. However, I don't think that the history of lesbianism has always been queer.
Interesting.
What I mean by that is like the way that lesbian movements in the past have excluded Black people, for example, or in the way that they've excluded trans people. They were like,
but not all lesbians are white lesbians, also. But
no, of course not. But like movements, have
like
excluded
lesbian
them.
as a
as like a general societal movement hasn't always been inclusive.
I also think like present day, there's a lot of people who identify as lesbian. Like you'll see it in the States, like these people who are actually like conservatives, a lot of like white conservative lesbians, where it's like you're not queering any other aspect of your identity. Like it's just a sexuality to you. You know what I mean? And I think if you're using it as just a sexuality and you're not resonating with any of the history of lesbian identity, or you're not resonating with how it positions you in society, I don't think that's very queer. Like, I think it's this mentality of like, oh, all of you guys are doing too much with your queerness. They're accepting me. Like, I'm not going to be in trouble. It's like, honey, they're going to come for you at some point. You know what I mean? It's like the rules continue to get stricter and stricter and stricter of what's considered allowed. Right now they're coming for trans people, but that's not the end of the line,
Yeah.
in my opinion. So there is an interesting history to lesbianism as being political and like when it started to become political. So I'm going to share some more information with you all. Sure. This was happening in the second wave of feminism in the 1970s. Like I mentioned earlier, the area where there was a very big racial divide happening as well within the feminist movements. So, of course, it was criticized for only focusing on white middle-class women's experiences and not addressing the issue of race and class. It was inspired by the civil rights movement and fought for gender equality against sexism, but was not intersectional, sadly. It was also a big breaking point in lesbian history as it critiqued the Butch Femme dynamic because they saw it as heteronormative role-playing and a continuation of misogynistic power dynamics. The second wave of feminism made lesbianism into a political choice instead of based on sexual desire. And there's a quote here from Lyndall McCowens from the book Femme Stigma in the Feminist 70s and 80s. So she says that the making of lesbianism into a political identity denied its validity as a sexuality. This is especially important to the question of Butch Femme because Butch and Femme are gender constructions that arise from a sexual definition of lesbianism. The lesbian feminists misunderstand Butch Femme because each side is working from a different definition of lesbian. Like, of course, one side seeing it as much more of like a gender construct from like that first quote that we started this episode with, and the other just seeing it as a sexuality and nothing more. This also created the idea that femininity in itself is a patriarchal trap, making femmes patriarchal victims. So rather, it was kind of like a misunderstanding of what femme identity is. Like, rather than seeing it as a reconstruction of femininity in under your own gaze, outside of the male gaze, they were seeing it as you are still a victim, you're still playing into these roles. Yeah. They weren't understanding that to be femme is to consciously choose femininity outside of the approval of men. So these new lesbian spaces came with a pre-decided set of rules on how to dress and behave, no bras, no heels, no lipstick, and other displays of classic femininity. The look became much more androgynous. Femmes felt like they no longer could express themselves in a way that felt authentic to them. Leading into the late 80s and 90s, there was a Butch Femme renaissance as femmes started to write down their own experiences, and that's really where a lot of the information that we're reading is coming from. So moving into the 90s and 2000s came with a big shift towards queerness, so it was now acceptable to exist outside of the Butch Femme dynamic, and we started to see more inclusion of the lesbian community with less strict rules. Some lesbians do feel like this move towards overall queerness has been an erasure of lesbian identity, of like that original like Butch Femme dynamic and like the historical roots. Do you agree, or do you think the shift is positive towards queerness?
I personally think it's positive just because I feel like you can also still like, just from personal experience, like I know a ton of people who still specifically identify with Butch or Femme. It does leave space for people who don't have to stick through strict binaries. I think only sticking with those strict binaries and like not having room for interpretation or not having room for openness, that in itself is a lot more heteronormative than like having that openness for queerness in general. So I think it is positive personally. Because for me, being queer is like literally like you are existing outside of like, you are the counterculture. So you can literally do whatever because like there's no rules, right? There shouldn't be any rules. So I think it is majorly positive. It's leading to a lot of acceptance. It's leading to a lot of people like realizing that you don't have to be the right kind of lesbian or the right kind of gay to be able to be queer, to be able to be lesbian, to be able to be gay.
I do think that there is progress. I think even in me feeling the comfort that I do within myself, as opposed to when I was younger, a part of that is just me, but I think a part of that is also the shift and the involvement that's happening. I think that it's becoming more, these sorts of conversations are becoming more prevalent, and I think that does speak to the expansion of people's minds. But yeah, like I think like where we are, like we have to keep moving forward and making that progress.
I think it's like this desire for people to not be put in boxes. Like I think what a lot of us have realized is the norms of the queer community in the past, it was like taking you out of a box to put you in another box,
exactly.
basically.
Yeah,
and people are like, ooh, actually no boxes feel good to me. And like I think that's the move towards queerness. I think it's also a move towards like an intersectional politic as well, rather than like the politic that was happening at the time, which was like very just like white centered or like divisive as well. So overall, I think it's positive too. I understand where people are coming from when they're like feel like they want to identify with this thing in this very strict way to honor the history. I think you can also honor history while understanding that times change.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And like you can learn your history and honor your history while things are changing in a positive direction too.
I was going to say that you can honor history the best by like being you. Progress is made so that people can be themselves. So that's, in my opinion, the best way to honor something. It's like you opened up the doors for me to explore even further. So why wouldn't I go further?
So this next section that we want to jump into is surrounding femme identity, decentering men, and redefining what being a woman means. So I want to share a little bit of information around femme identity specifically to help us like form this conversation. Mainly, this first one is a quote from Orditz, which is a book called Dresses for My Round Brown Body. And it says, Femme is reclaiming the attributes associated with femininity that have been so often used against us individually and collectively, and using them for our own benefit and pleasure. And the next piece is that the femme is a queer body in feminine drag. Many lesbian scholars will argue that femmes are more related to drag queens than they are to heterosexual women, and that they are both constructing their own version of femininity outside of predetermined patriarchal roles. I thought all this information was very powerful, but I'm wondering, Pkat, as someone who embraces like a very high femme aesthetic, what has reclamation of femininity outside of the male gaze looked for you? And also, like, what do you think of this as well?
Yeah. Honestly, you said that quote, and it's exactly how I think about
It's
femininity.
powerful. I love it.
It's powerful. And it's also like I mentioned before, like I feel like my personality is a bit more like dude bro-y, you know? It's and when I was growing up, like a lot of my friends, I actually had a lot of trouble with making friends with women because like, or girls because like, I don't know, I felt like my attitude was just a bit more like straightforward, I guess like a bit more abrasive and abrupt. So like, the way I talk is kind of bro-y, I feel like even in this podcast, you know? So like I had a hard time with femininity in terms of like a straight kind of femininity or like you had to be the right amount of like appealing but also like desirable. It was like the soft, docile femininity. That's what I had a hard time with. Honestly,
The like subservient part
exactly,
of it.
subservient. And even when I was getting older, and it's funny because I didn't think I centered men really ever growing up. Like
Didn't sound like it.
never. I never did. No, never. I don't know how to center men because honestly, like I didn't have good role models. Like my father is a piece of shit, and I'll say it again. My father's a piece of shit. You know, deadbeat, right? And then my stepdad, I had a lot of disagreements with. I think he had more kind of old fashioned values, and I had more like modern values. The way that I want to reclaim femininity outside of even like in media, the male gaze. I think of like a male gaze, like ideal woman would be like Megan Fox in Transformers. That kind of vibe where she's a cool girl, she's sexy, she's feminine, but only in a male gaze way. No bows, no frills, no jewels. It's very much like a low cut tank top and tiny short shorts, very sexual. And I was like, fuck that. I've always tied femininity with like what women want because what feminine people want. So what you said about drag, like, yeah, like of course all the jewels, all the lashes, all the sparkles, that shit is uncomfortable and like, but it is a visual treat. It is like pushing the boundary. It's just like aesthetic. It's like an art form, you know?
100%.
That's what I see my femininity as. Like, if I'm trying to dress comfortable, I'm probably gonna wear like a sweatpants and like a t-shirt. But like, I want to be pushing boundaries in that way. I want to be so high art. That's why I'm so high femme. Like, I just think it looks fucking cool, and also like, why not? Why not be an artist? Why not push those boundaries, you know, in your everyday life? My personality, I genuinely think is quite androgynous, but like it's the high art aspect. I'm an artist. That's why I'm pushing this like very feminine drag, so to speak.
Do you think that straight women can be femme? You know what I mean? Like, can they embody this idea of like still decentering men when you're dating them? You know what I mean? This idea of like redefining your femininity while still dating men.
I think they can definitely have that idea. I don't know about the term femme. I would say femme is specifically reserved for queer people because that is there's a history with that. There's a shared experience kind of deal. But I encourage more straight women to dress in a feminine way that it exists outside the male gaze. You know, like, y'all, I do not dress like this to get male attention at the slice. These are naked women earrings. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, I dress like this because it's art, because it's fun, because it's cunty, because it's slay, you know? Like a drag queen. It's fun. It's colorful and whatever. I encourage more straight women to dress, you know, in bows and frills and like hyper feminine in a way that like men would just never understand or never like kind of like traditionally look into, straight men. Yeah, I think that anybody can really dress in a way that's feminine, that decenters the male gaze. Yeah. But specifically the term femme, I think that's reserved for queer people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel that. I think I had a similar experience growing up that you had, Karbon, where it was like I felt like I wanted male validation for like a popularity means, you know what I mean? Like it felt like that status symbol. So I did fall into like totally losing my sense of style to just like dress like that Megan Fox archetype of like I just like need to be like validated in a way, because it was like that insecurity that you have in high school. I think I really embody like masculinity and femininity, and like when I do femininity, I like to do it in a very like high femme way as well, but it's like it's a big spectrum for me. What helped me and like what I'd encourage other people to do is like when you're putting clothes on your body is like, does this actually feel like me? Does this feel like a representation of my essence, like who I am, or am I trying to get something external out of it, you know? And like, that is how I found my true style and my true self, if that makes sense, is like your gender identity or your gender expression, it can be like so fluid and so shifting.
Yes.
And every day I wake up and I feel kind of different, but I used to put myself in this box where I was like, every day I wake up and I'm feminine, you know? And it's like, it's not, in reality, it's not actually like that. And I think if more people started deconstructing all of these ideas of gender roles, then you might start to feel that in yourself too. It's just like you've really suppressed it probably.
Absolutely. And I just because I'm a stylist as well, like I literally encourage every single person ever to dress for yourself. Dress for what you feel good in, whether it's like, you know, for comfort or like just what you think looks cool. Like I dress like this because like I think I look good in sparkles and glitter. And that little voice in my brain is like, you cannot leave the house until you're cunty and slay enough. So like I dress for me. I literally forget that other people can see what I'm wearing. I literally dress for that voice in my brain, you know? So everybody should be dressing for their own. Like, do you feel like yourself when you look in the mirror? That's what you should dress. Masc, femme, whatever. You know?
Is decentering men an intentional and important practice for you? And how do you see that relationship?
I feel like I don't think I ever centered men in the first place. Decentering the male gaze, now that is something I definitely have had to work on. I looked at pictures of myself and my style evolution from before when I used to identify as bisexual. I would still dress for the male gaze. Lots of like short shorts, low cut tops, like things that were accessible for men to take off. You know, that I was thinking like with specifically sex in mind, not like any sort of expression or any sort of like fun, you know, I was thinking sex. So I think like decentering, a lot of decentering is like literally like paying attention to what you feel good in. And once you dress for yourself, you are by definition just decentering like honestly anybody, because you could be centering women in your dress or like centering men, but like dressing for yourself, that will decenter everything.
Centering yourself in all ways, whether it's fashion, career choice, like all of these things. So much of like unlearning is like identifying like what you're carrying that is not your narrative. And when you can understand like that, you are breaking those things. And when you exercise it in all the parts of your life, then it becomes easier to exercise it in this part of your life as well. I never really centered men either. Maybe just from upbringing and origins. I know queer women that struggle with it, you know, like where it's like, I don't like them, but when they come, I do this thing where I give them space or attention. And it's like, I get that, right? It's like, I may not innately feel it, but I do get that. And I think continuing to practice like awareness of what your emotions even feel like. I don't know, if you're centering men and it feels good, then do you, right? But it's like, if it doesn't feel good, then you have to identify that it doesn't feel good. And you have to be able to feel that, like feel the feeling and be connected to yourself. It's just giving yourself the okay to be like, oh, I did this, it's not for me. I felt this, it's not for me. I like this, it is for me. Like moving forward in that and actually taking steps like, oh, this doesn't work for me. My friends like this. I'm going to find community that giving ourselves
That's true,
that,
yeah.
giving
If
ourselves
your
that
whole
opportunity.
community is centering men, you're gonna keep feeling like you need to center men.
Yeah, of course.
But if you're surrounding yourself with people who don't do that, who feed into their own interests and hobbies and have their whole identity outside of the attention of men, then you're going to start feeling that way. So I think it's even feeling into like what environments, what friend groups, what's making me feel this negative feeling, you know, and like really tying that into like what it actually is. It's like, oh, these are people who are centering men, and that doesn't feel good for me.
I only center men when I use them to get what I want.
Oh,
Real. I'll take your money. Shit.
I have a difficult time with that. I feel like there's an energy that I know that I could give to get it, and I have a hard time doing it.
Like, what energy do you think that is?
It's all, to me, it's like...
Just making them feel like they're better than they are.
Yeah.
I feel like it's
Feeding
like,
into ego.
it's feeding into the
It
ego.
feels wrong, doesn't it?
I guess maybe it's that it's so far from me because it feels like I have to tap into my femininity and turn it up in a way that is...
Oh, no, I don't do that.
How do you do it? Talk to me.
Give me the secrets.
I talk to them, and listen, at this point, with the way that I look and everything, I'm very aware that no matter how feminine that I try to be, it's not going to do anything for them.
I live there, so talk to me.
Completely different approach. I go with like, we're homies, we're bros. Like, I'm going to stroke your ego so that you can give me something in return, something that I want.
It works, actually. I've seen it works really well.
It's like,
bros, we're homies. You're not gonna do me the solid.
They want to be in the inner circle really bad. Yeah, it's so true. They think you're really cool.
you can actually use your masculinity to get there. And like, you know, I love getting what I want. So
wait. When we say get what we want, right? Like, were we talking about dinner?
I'm talking about, we could be dinner, it could be drinks, it could be a favor, it could be carry something for me, because
She gets carried things a lot. People carry shit for you.
I don't want to carry things.
I do that all the time too, but I have a very feminine, different way of doing it. But yes,
Like, I won't ask for help very much. I don't know why, but people will, like, when we were moving into this place, people would come up and like, oh, do you need help with that? And I'd be like, no, obviously struggling. And she's like, yup. Throws it up in the air.
Immediately was like, I was like, all the way up, please. Because you know, especially as we were talking about like the history of like Femme and Butch, and like Butch was like the person who would like protect the Femme, etc. I'm like, I don't need to play that.
She can't even complain to the waitress.
No. Instead of I protect us, how about we get others to protect us?
there you go.
Build an army.
Like, I'll do that work of finding the allies.
They're playing
They'll
chess.
lift the shit.
Yes.
Wow,
Yes,
that's great.
Speaking of masculinity and femininity, I feel like there's this like notion in the air in the community that masculine lesbians get more dates.
They do.
Pkat.
Fuck. Okay. Well, so we've established I dress hyper femme, but I do a lot of like, I think I mentioned multi-hyphenate. Multi-hyphenate means I live in Toronto and I need to do whatever job it takes for me to pay the bills. So like, I'm a florist as well. Yeah. So in floristry, you have to you're making beautiful things, but you're not necessarily looking beautiful. You have to have short nails. You have to like wear practical clothing. You can't have all the flourishes that come with a lot of feminine clothing, right? So I dress quite mask. And let me tell you, the amount of times I get hit on, or the amount of like girls who are up in my DMs whenever I post one shitty mask fit versus like the hours that I spend looking femme and like everything. It's kind of disheartening a little bit, because I'm like, okay, I put all my time and effort, and I genuinely feel most myself when I dress like super hyper femme. Girls only want me when I'm dressed some sort of masculine way. And I think like, well, I've gathered just anecdotal evidence from my friends and whatever.
Evidence.
Share your findings.
Share your findings. People are DMing me. They're like, oh, like I have a friend who they said to me, I'm not about you when you're femme, but when you're mask, hit me up. And I was like, that makes me want to fucking kill myself, because I'm like, I am femme. Like that's my soul. My soul is I am very a feminine woman. So. I think people associate maybe maskness. A reason why I also didn't come out as lesbian until I was like 20 was because they associate maskness with like some sort of seriousness, or like you're a real lesbian, you're a real dyke if you're mask, or
like your gold star.
Exactly, your gold star.
You're a real one.
A real one, which I abhor, and I resent the fact that like feminine lesbians are not seen as like serious lesbians. I think that's really stupid. Yeah. And like people do associate with like masculinity with domination, with topping, with like all that stuff. So again, I've mentioned I'm a switch, but like when I say I'm femtop, when people don't really whatever, but like when I say like when I dress mask and like you know people are like ooh, you know, now they're
like,
into
now I can visualize it.
exactly.
Thank you
Now
for the aid. Yeah.
Exactly. I just think it's really dumb, and I think that like there needs to be a cultural perception. The reason why I continue to dress very hyper femme and like present myself as hyper femme, like loudly saying the lesbian, loudly saying I'm queer, so that other people can be like, oh, this is real. Like hyper femme lesbians 100% are valid, 100% exist, and like are just as valid as any other sort of presenting way. As to why they get more bitches.
What are your findings? Yeah.
I don't know. I think I genuinely think it is that kind of seriousness. Maybe other people can talk on it, but like
I have a thought.
Yeah, please go ahead.
I think that people are used to these like man and woman power dynamic.
Yes.
I think it's what's most familiar to you is like as women, we're often used to being pursued. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's kind of like an animal kind of a way. Like sometimes you feel it's giving like shark attack vibes when you're at the bar. But you're used to that. Like you're used to like beating people away like too much, you know? And then you get into a lesbian space and you're like, oh, no one's approaching me. Because like a lot of us, none of us really know how to approach each other very well. Because we haven't. I mean, when you're first starting out is what I'm saying. When you're first starting out, I didn't know how to approach people.
Seasoned. Exactly.
You know? And the only examples you have are the examples of masculinity. And I will say there was a brief stint where I tried to dress very masculine in a way that was not me. Like I can give masculinity now in a way that feels authentic to me. But at the time I was like, hey, I'm going to wear this cutoff shirt and I'm going to go get some bitches at Cruise and Tangos. And it was like, no.
Get some bitches at Cruise and Tangos. I'm fucking dead.
Just like standing there in your mask.
I was like, someone noticed me. Wasn't giving. But you're just comfortable with it. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's oftentimes a lot of people, when you first come out, you fall into this butch femme dynamic.
Yeah.
Potentially. I think it's some people's actual preferences for sure.
Yeah.
But I also think it can be something you fall into. And I think like as you discover yourself more, like that's what I thought I was only into. Like I was only into super mass presenting people. And now that I've like opened myself up, I'm like, I'm into whoever, whatever, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think another piece of it is that masc lesbians are just more visible as lesbians.
Yes.
So I think
point.
there's this piece where sometimes when you're femme presenting lesbian, people don't immediately clock you as lesbian. They don't immediately identify that. So they don't know to go for you.
Yeah.
Unless you're specifically
No, but I'm
in
at
like
a queer
sapphic-
space.
Oh,
like even
that's
still,
different.
you know what I'm saying? Like I'm
shit.
like this is all my my personal Instagram where it's like hella like everywhere, femme lesbian, you know, like it's everywhere, right? And like
what kind of queer space? Because like
$3 bill.
Oh.
Or like at a queer event, you know, like I do notice that I get hit on more if I'm like dressed mask versus dressed femme, and like people know me in that space, right? So like
I have the same experience too.
right? And like I think I should also note that I do tend to go for more femme people. Like my type is just more femmes.
Yeah.
So I think that also has dynamics to play with. But even still, like when I was like dating men, even I would be the forward one.
Yeah.
You know?
Really?
I'd go up to men. I'd be like, "Hey, you're hot." You
Yeah.
know? I don't know if I really ever said that, but I was like, you want to buy me a drink?
Don't call me. Yeah.
You know, I would say you
think
want,
I'm hot.
exactly. I was like, I know you think I'm hot. I've been looking at you. You want to buy me a drink, and I've been like that even hyper femme when I'm with women. Like I'd be like, hey, I think you're so sexy. I would love to know first of all where you got that dress because I might get one too, but also like, can I take it off? But I think you said the visibility part is a huge thing.
It can be,
Yeah.
for sure. I feel like sometimes even if you're at a queer event or if you're at queer bar, like if you're at like Cruise and Tangos, you still might be straight. Like there's a lot of straight women that go there.
Yeah.
You're never really sure.
Yeah. The wild thing was like a friend of ours who was one of like our first Out Loud winners, which was like our music program. We were filming that and then later she told me like, oh, I thought you were straight when I met you. I was like, what? I was the one communicating you from Queer Collective, and because like I dress feminine, you're still reading me as straight. Like it goes so
that's
deep.
crazy.
So frustrating.
And I'm like, you're also a bisexual femme presenting person. Like it's so I don't know. But that stuck with me. I'm like, what?
Maybe a part of that is like when femmes communicate their interest in someone more masculine presenting. I feel like there's still a little bit of like this like inherent unspoken onus on the mask person to do something with the information. Because what I've noticed is being mask presenting, I learned that nothing is going to happen if I don't. Like generally, for the most part, there's not very many people I've encountered, and I find that I don't know if it's like my type, but interacted most with femmes, and I've learned that I really have to read between the lines and figure it out. And because of the social anxiety, I had to learn. I also know people that are femme and they're attracted to femmes, but it's like, who's gonna?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think like when you're the mask, there's this expectation that like you have to initiate a lot of things and you have to like figure out whether or not they're actually flirting with you and like decode whatever the fuck they're saying.
So they don't have to worry. Like if they like throw you a little comment, it's like I'm not worried because if like you have to take the risk if we're gonna actually go somewhere with this. Whereas I feel like when there isn't a mask presenting, then it's kind of like, well, who's going to do it?
It's because they're so stuck in their gender roles. They can't understand a feminine person taking on that role.
Yeah.
And then when you come up to them and you do it, sometimes it's like, oh, what? Am I attracted to this? I don't know.
Right? It's difficult being like, just having a more bro-y kind of like take charge kind of personality and then like dressing super hyper femme because people don't, expect that. It was interesting because like I thought that men actually like took to my personality and dating a lot more than like a lot of femme women are. Like a lot of femme women think I'm like trying to be friends with them, and I'm like, I literally explicitly said I wanted to have sex with you.
Yeah, I'm telling you I want to take your dress off.
Literally, like what about this is friendly? You know, like let's put on each other's makeup and then mess it up afterwards.
Exactly.
Why not?
Exactly.
You know, we're fucking gay. Who cares? You know, these stupid gender roles. Like we could do whatever the fuck we want to.
I totally agree. Did either of you want to plug anything that you have going on? Thank you so much for spending this time with us today. If you have any new projects and places where people can find you.
New music. I feel like I'm going to be dropping a lot of new music this year. So nominated for a Juno for my record Double the Fun. And this conversation reminds me so much how much we need to just continue to celebrate ourselves, which is what that song is about. Performance near you soon, hopefully, if you're in Canada and also beyond.
You can follow me on Instagram at p.kat.nye, Pkat9, that's me. Honestly, I'm a model, so all of my stuff is last minute, but catch me at a gay event near you.
Catch me on a billboard.
Catch me on a billboard. Honestly, catch me on a billboard. Catch me in an ad near you. Yeah. If y'all think I'm cool, hit me up on Instagram. Like I love making friends. I love like community.
Femmes.
Hit them up. Femmes.
No, femme for femmes. If you, whatever, like any queer people, like, genuinely, if you think that like you like my vibe, I am always down for always creative endeavors. Always down for photo shoots. Also, I'm trying to get more into music. Like musical theater was my first love. So queer theater people, hit me up.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us today. And if you want to dive deeper into lesbianism, we have a whole other episode on it. It's called The Entire History of Lesbians. Make sure to like and subscribe. And if you're listening on your favorite podcast app, make sure to leave us a 5-star review because it really does help the podcast out. That's everything that we got. And until next time, peace.